I'm Captain Terry Rafferty, OC Rifles Training Team, and I was awarded the Military Cross on Op Herrick 15. I was the Rifle Company Sergeant Major of A Company 2 Rifles, a rifle company attached to 5 rifles who were the ground holding battle group in Nari Saraj South. On Op Herrick 15 we had a fairly experienced company with guys that had served in Iraq and Afghanistan on previous tours, and we'd had relative success thus far on the tour. We'd also suffered a few losses in the fact that we'd lost key personnel, 3 very serious injuries to Rifleman Fred Owusu, Rifleman Justin Davis and Sergeant Chris Jakeman, who'd all been casualties as a result of an ID strike, separate incidents before Christmas. I'd been on R&R in January, and it'd been a great R&R. I'd spent time with my family, but it was also, I'd visited Sergeant Chris Jakeman, who's a personal friend of mine, and on the flight back I remember it weighing fairly heavily on my mind about him, the loss of not having key personnel, somebody of his stature in the company, and how we were going to move forward. And I can remember being sat in Minad on the stopover, and it's been delayed by the RAF for 15 hours, and I can remember giggling to myself the fact that I'd been on rest and recuperation, and I was more fatigued, I think, than I'd been the previous 3 months on the tour. And by the time I got back to Bastion, it'd been about 20 hours since I should have been there. I was greeted by the OC Ben Maguire at the flight line, and he informed me that we were going on an operation in the early hours of the morning, and I can just remember thinking, oh my God. We'd conducted all the relevant pre-deployment preparation, orders, rehearsals, kit checks, and we departed PB2 by helicopter about 0300, and we landed in the Bowery in north of the Neb Canal about 04. And the Bowery is an arid desert location where the Taliban had free movement of people and equipment, and it had loads of success with contacts against coalition forces and the Afghan army throughout the whole tour. And 5 Rifles Battle Group headquarters wanted us to strike various compounds to deny their ability to conduct operations. And when we landed, normally there's 1 or 2 things happen. At the drop-off, you normally have complete silence where nothing happens and you can kind of conduct your operation freely, or you're contacted at the drop-off. When we landed, there was no immediate noise, and we carried on with the intent and the mission at hand. And one of the first compounds that we checked had a massive weapons cache and loads of opium, high quantity. So we went through the normal form and procedure. I was the unit search advisor for A Company, so I commanded the search team. Midway through the search, there was the normal intercepted comms from the Taliban proclaiming to be moving hundreds of fighters into the area, which would normally be in the tens, not hundreds. They'd claim things like "get the big thing ready," which is normally prestige weapon systems like 50 cal Dushka or RPG variants. So we were aware of this. Because I'd had loads of experience, hearing that type of narrative, we didn't change what we were doing, but we were aware because we knew if they're sending that type of information over the net, then they knew we were there and they were trying to disrupt us psychologically. So we carried on what we were doing. Once we'd processed all the equipment that we'd confiscated on the search, the weapons and the opium, the OC wanted to carry on with his intent to push north into the Bowery and disrupt the Taliban and their safe houses. And this is what we did. So we had a confirmation brief, and then we started to manoeuvre our multiples north into the Bowery. The compound that we left, after about 150 metres of manoeuvring tactically, 1 foot on the ground with each multiple supporting each other, there was a large contact, and initially it sounded like it was like an echo, but what now transpires it was 4 confirmed firing points where the Taliban had been waiting in ambush, and so I conducted what everybody else does and did the RTR drill, really conscious of not just getting down on the floor because of secondary strikes from an ID or ordnance. And then I lay there, and then it became I was really acutely aware that the ground was so open and if it wasn't so serious, it would have been comical, because it's like the worst position ever to take cover, because there was none. The only cover was 150 metres back where we just come from, and then I noticed about 50 metres to the front there was a small irrigation ditch, and the guys from B Company that were our brigade advisory team, they were there returning fire. Now I lay there, and I'd been engaged loads in Iraq and Afghanistan before, but the volume and the accuracy, it was the first time that I actually felt pretty scared. And there was loads of rounds incoming, lots of splash, ricochets of rocks. And I thought to myself, I can either lie here and roll the dice, or I can do something about it. Now, to do something about it, I would have to get up. But the other option, to lay there, just didn't seem realistic. So I gathered my thoughts quickly. I stood up, and Stevie Mack, who was the BAG senior NCO, I can remember him saying to me, "What the fuck are you doing?" And I ran forward as hard as I could, as fast as I could, to get to the irrigation ditch, and it just felt like it was never coming. It felt like a Monty Python sketch where it just never arrived. And I was sprinting so hard, and I could feel my lungs were bursting. And I got to this irrigation ditch, and Corporal Allen, who was the section commander for B Company, was engaged in the Taliban, and his guys were taking some fairly accurate fire. At this stage, I can remember the two words that you never want to hear as a soldier, and that is man down. Now, I've experienced this before, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it never gets any easier, because you know that somebody within your friends, the people that you know and love, somebody has been hurt. So I heard the voice, and the voice was from Corporal May, who was our CMT medic. She's the best medic that I've ever worked with. She was absolutely phenomenal. She was my medic on Herrick 10, and she was that good on that tour that I'd specifically asked her to be the medic again for Herrick 15 when I became the company sergeant major. She was screaming, but she was back from where I'd just come from, ironically. So I'd said to Corporal Allen, "We need to give some suppressive fire, because I need to get back." And he even looked at me and said to say, "What are you going back there for?" I just literally ran and exposed myself to get to here. But being the company sergeant major, that's one of my primary roles, is the CASEVAC of all personnel within the company, the subunit. So I knew I had to get back there. So I asked him to give me a rapid rate of fire, and I fired the 66 rocket launcher that was on my day sack, just to try and bide a little bit of time to get the enemy's head down, so I could get back to assist Jules, the medic. So I fired the 66, could hear the boys from B Company giving a decent rate of fire, and I got up and ran backwards to where I'd just come from. And when I got there, it was one of the Afghan warriors from our partnered company from the heavy weapons tow lay had sustained a gunshot wound to the side of the head, and the left side of his head was open. And I remember looking at it thinking, it was only a couple of seconds, but it felt like I was looking at him for minutes, where I was just trying to process what the visible injuries that he had, because it just seemed a little bit bizarre. At this point, there was Corporal Thompson, who was one of the B Company NCOs, came to assist. So the medic was briefing me, and I was back briefing the OC at this stage, because we were dislocated and we were in two different locations. So I was briefing him what was going on and what we needed to do, and I'm thinking, CASEVAC, where am I going to go? Going rearwards was the only option, because it was the only cover available, but it was 150 metres away, and we'd have to do it on foot. I was thinking a HLS for MERT, so the Medical Emergency Response Team, which is obviously the med team on the back of a Chinook from Bastion. I was asking for MERT via the ops room. They were saying they were queuing up all the relevant assets, and the OC was still badgering me for information, because he was obviously on the battle group net, trying to inform them of what was going on within the scenario itself. While Jules was administering first aid, we were really aware that it was a fairly grotesque head injury, so therefore morphine was not, in the equation. So we just had to basically patch him up. And I said to listen, mate, we're just gonna have to get this guy back ourselves. So Corporal Thompson grabbed his kit. I briefed the interpreter Daoud to brief the Afghan officer that we were going to extract him by foot. and I picked this guy up, and my kit was on average about 50 kilo, which is fairly typical for a soldier in Afghanistan. You're talking your Osprey body armour, your helmet, your weapon, your ammunition, water, rations, etc., etc. So I picked him up, and it must have been clearly the adrenaline, because initially it felt like nothing, and I felt I could just run forever. And that lasted for about 100 meters when I quickly hit the wall, and I felt like my heart was going to explode from my chest, because I was carrying this guy on my back, and we were still receiving some fairly accurate fire, and Tomo, the Lance Corporal, was with me, and we got back, and we basically fire manoeuvred back with this guy back behind cover that was out of shot from visible direct fire from small arms, which was at least a bit of a relief. I identified a place on the ground that was out of arc for direct fire, so I'd named that as the HLS, fired that up the net, give the grid, and we were going to mark that by smoke. The casualty, we were losing him at this stage because he had a fairly fairly grotesque head injury, and he was bleeding quite heavily. So we were trying to, maintain, the integrity of the casualty, keep him alive, liaise with the Afghans, and as we were doing this, the Mert was then visible in the sky, which was a real relief. And I saw the helicopter inbound, brief the casualty what we were doing, and as it was en route to the drop-off, I then saw what was a cloud of smoke and a subsequent explosion, and it turns out that the Taliban had actually they pinged the HLS, whether by design or by luck, and they were dropping ordnance on the HLS. So the Mert at this stage then banked away, which I was absolutely devastated about, and we realised that the Kazivac exchange point had been compromised, so we had to then push further south towards the Neb Canal. So the only way to do that was to pick him up for a second time, and between me and Corporal Thompson, we fire manoeuvred back about another 150 metres with ordnance landed. Now initially I think the guys thought it was IDF, but I'd assessed it as being underslung grenade launcher, because the explosion was slightly smaller, but nonetheless dangerous. So we made our way back on foot, another 150 metres with this guy on my back, and we got him to relative safety as this fire started to wither, because we're then out of range of small arms fire. We then saw the Warthogs from the QDGs, and we got the casualty stabilised. The Mert landed in a safer location. We transferred him to the med team onto the Mert, and he was extracted. We then had a tactical pause as a company. I had an actual face-to-face liaison with the OC. We looked at the laydown where we were, make sure we were mutually supporting each other, and we made an orderly extraction out of contact back towards the Neb Canal for a subsequent pickup by vehicle. And I can remember in the back of the vehicle that everybody the adrenaline was clearly visible, because everybody was fairly wide-eyed, talking really fast, a little bit giddy. And that remained like that until we seemed to arrive at PBC really quickly. The time is a bit condensed, and we did the normal form of a patrol debrief, the J2 upload, cleaned weapons, did all the normal kit checks and administration post patrol like we would do for every patrol. And then I can remember being back in my tent, wiping my own weapon down, and just kind of like collapsing on the bed, on the cot bed, and it's as if somebody just like pulled the plug, where my body just flatlined for a bit, and I slept for hours, kind of just slumped over on the bed, and that was the last abiding memory I could have of the day. And then when I woke up later on, we just kind of cracked on with the rest of the patrol matrix and carried on with the rest of the tour.